he could be Marty McFly out of Back to the Future 2, and on his hoverboard.
He's going to be a shooting star instead.
Oh, he's going to be a shooting star. So. Hello, 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 and welcome to Well Shit. It really is that simple. I'm Claire.
And I'm Serena. On this podcast, we help you to understand about your 12 universal needs, why they are currently not being well met,
how to meet them in ways that work for you, and how to consistently do so in quick, easy, and simple ways that fit seamlessly into your life.
We'll also help you to understand how doing so will have a positive ripple effect in literally every area of your life.
If you like what you hear, come and join the conversation in our Facebook group.
And enjoy the show.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hey, everyone. Well, today we are talking about something that is currently up. As you know, we podcast, record a couple of months in advance, usually get a couple of bulk episodes. And we wanted to do this one now because I am currently in the process of planning my costumes for the Fantasy Fest and Halloween season. I know a lot of people are going to start planning what they're doing as well. I tend to get on a little bit early because I have so much to do.
There's one or two in the mix, right?
Yeah, just one or two. But something that came up, it actually is very present around this time of year, but came up personally, and we'll get into it a little bit later, is about costumes and Halloween.
As people who are big costumers, like yes. we enjoy the whole costume thing.
Like, it doesn't actually have to be a celebration. We just
it doesn't have to be a holiday week, like an average Tuesday wear costume. Like, so it's something that's very kind of dear to our hearts because it's something that we like it. We're very involved with costuming, so making sure that we're doing that in a way which is mindful of needs is really important.
Yes. So today we're going to talk about how culture is not a costume. And we wanted to do this in enough time and have this episode released so that we're not releasing it on Halloween. And it's like, well, what do I do with this? Like giving you enough time to have an awareness to be like, okay, let me think about what my plans were. Do I need to switch it up a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Do I need to like revisit or a kind of question? And the kind of big focus on this really is for in the context that we're sharing it today. There's lots of ways we need to be mindful in our costuming, but the specific area that we want to focus on today is being mindful of cultural appropriation. Now, first things first, we are not experts and we are not educators when it comes to anti-racism work, when it comes to cultural appropriation. So the first and most important thing is that we are speaking directly to people who are like us. Like when we're having this conversation, if you are kind of palm-colored or equally unmelinated, then we are having this conversation to you. But I think the other thing is that we are raising this because it has a relevance to needs. There is a very specific needs context that is relevant in this that I've not heard anybody speak about in quite the way that we wanted to address it. So the first thing is, don't listen to us as experts on cultural appropriation. Obviously, we're experts when it comes to needs, and that's the reason that we're bringing this up. But it's really important to go and find experts and educators who are BBIMP. So that's a term that was coined by According to WEAS, which stands for Black, Brown, Indigenous and Melanated People. Specifically women and specifically people, especially if there is a culture that you are wanting to be quote unquote inspired by or wanting to be quote unquote engaged with, especially go and look for people from that culture and see what conversations they are having about this. Most importantly, pay them for the for their expertise, pay them for their the fact that they are educating you. It's really important that and this is how I have learned about this. This is how we've learned about this, is that we have gone to go and find out about these things, because so often these things what happens is that we make a misstep when it comes to due to our ignorance, just because of a lack of awareness, we do something that causes a negative impact to somebody else, and we then get called out about it, and that's by that point the harm's already done, and at that point it's like, how do we now try and make amends and make it right? the best way of approaching this work is actually to go out there proactively, to go out there and try and find out about this stuff ahead of time so that you can avoid making the mistakes and missteps in the first place. And you can learn. I mean, I'm so grateful that I began my journey with anti-racism work when I did, because I did it before a lot of people did, which meant that there were moments where I saw other people doing things and I'm like, thank God that I've had the education that I have, and that I have gone and I've done the courses and I've learned from these incredible experts who have helped me to understand how these things are harmful, and therefore I have avoided doing harm to others, because obviously that's the essence of what we're talking about here, as we talked about, and we'll go into more depth later. Sorry, she says, just making sure that we are actually recording. If you listen to us regularly, you know why I'm doing that. And just making sure that we are, I've completely lost my train of thought now. I'm very grateful that I was, ultimately, that's where I was going, interconnectedness. So we'll get into this a little bit later, but as we know, because of the interconnectedness between humans, it's really important to understand that if we are doing things that negatively impact other people and their needs, or the needs ecosystem, then we are actually also negatively impacting our own. So not only is it kind of ethically and morally the thing that we want to do, if we want to show up as decent human beings, we don't want to do harm to others, but actually it negatively impacts us if we do this as well. The other thing just to say is that just because someone you know says that they're okay with it, doesn't negate the fact that there are often many others saying that it is harmful. Just because, like, I have a friend from that culture and they've said it's fine, that one person doesn't speak for the entire community.
Well, and that one person may not be speaking for themselves at that point either, because in an effort to meet their own needs, they may be minimizing the impact that has on them. They're like, well, what am I going to say to them? Oh, I don't want to create any...
They don't want to deal with the backlash.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why a lot of people say things are okay, fine. No, I don't have a problem with that, because that in that moment that might be easier for them,
and it might support their needs better,
and they might not even realize it's having an impact on them. Like, and that's one of the things that was so for me to learn in doing my work. It's like, wow, there are so many people that don't even see.
Well, I mean, let's use ourselves as examples in this, because obviously we can't speak from lived experience from people from those cultures, but we can speak as women. And I can speak as a woman who has listened to and heard more than her fair share of sexist, quote unquote, jokes over the years. And how much of that time did I not realize the effect actually was having on me?
I mean, actually, the conversation that we were having right before we got on, didn't you say?
Yeah.
We were at we were supporting one of our friends who's a musician, and we were sitting at a bar, and a little kid came walking in with a hat with two very big boobies on it. Like, I mean,
let's just call it what it is.
Yeah. They were boobies, and if you didn't know they were boobies, that little, I must have been like 5 years old, would tell you, boobies.
Right.
And I said, at first it was cute. And then when he said the boobies thing, I was like, wow, that child.
Well, I'm going to jump in. At first, you thought it was cute.
Yes.
Because I didn't think it was cute at all. Like, nothing about that seemed funny to me. Nothing about, like, the fact that a child... an apparently male child, now obviously I don't know what their gender identity is and who knows where they sit on that spectrum, but an apparently male child of a very young age was being taught to objectify women and sexualize women at that age. I found really offensive. I'm going to be honest, and there are so many people who are like, "Oh, Claire, it's just a joke. Don't be so sensitive." No, because we live in the bodies of the people who have to deal with that objectification and that conditioning, and deal with the consequences of that because of what gets learned as a result of that. So sorry, I didn't mean to just jump in there, but I was like, actually, no, I did mean to jump in. I didn't want to cut you off, but I just wanted to clarify like a little piece that you were saying.
Yeah, and that was a hard stop. Like, I immediately, my mind was like, oh, kid with booby hat on, like, and then he yelled out boobies, and I was like, oh. And I was like, this isn't like he found a hat that he thought was like, he
knew what it was.
He knew what it was, and he was kind of aware of what he was doing, and he made like the gestures, and then I was like, and realized it had switched. And I didn't even then, I didn't really realize like the deep impact it had. And Claire and I were talking about it this morning, actually. And we had a very similar conversation that obviously went a little longer. And I was like, like,
yeah,
I didn't realize like that's like that kind of uncomfortableness. That was my needs being impacted. That was my security in the larger world as a woman. Like, you're raising him to
I mean,
raising them
dot.
Yeah.
And there are so many ends of that sentence. Just from that one action alone, you can see it. And it's like, you don't realize how you're contributing to this culture of being, of the culture being unsafe for women.
We give kids a lot of leeway in that, like, oh, they're just children. Let them do what they want to do. And
quote unquote, boys will be boys. Like,
yeah.
I mean, it's just disgusting because we're teaching them not to be responsible. And we're also teaching them what is and is not okay. So that child is learning that is okay because it's being, it's permissible by the people who are responsible for him.
Right. Because if one of the older,
like,
people with
caregivers
them,
or what have you.
Yes,
yeah.
like I said, I don't want to.
If I had been in that group and that happened, I would have been like, that's really not okay. Like,
well, if one of them walked in with one of those hats on and was like boobies, I'd be like,
oh,
you are disgusting.
Right.
But I giggled at the child. Like, it's still my own conditioning.
Right.
That I'm like, oh, wait a minute. No, that's
quote
not
unquote funny. No,
right.
It's not.
No, objectifying anybody
Right.
isn't funny.
No, it's not. And so this is why, like, and I'm sure there are a lot of women who are listening to this and like Serena's like transitioned in how she feels about this literally in the last 20 minutes. And there was a point in which I wouldn't have seen it as a big deal because I wouldn't have been aware of the wider picture and how it's contributing to it.
There was a point I probably would have put that hat on that child's head, not
realizing,
even thinking about it, not knowing. Like, there was a point where I didn't even realize, to the point, like I said, that I was being impacted by simply being a woman.
Right.
And then as like the little kind of lights were like, ooh, I'm like, oh. So like it is for us, I don't like to say everybody, but I think for everybody, it is a constant process. And even when you think you're never done with your work, like,
right,
you're never done with it.
And this is the reason that just because somebody says it's okay doesn't mean that it's actually, just because one person says it's okay. Because there's a point, I am 99.999% sure, I couldn't tell you what it was, but I'm 99% sure at some point I've told a quote unquote sexist joke, maybe because I was working in an all male environment and I was trying to fit in. Like, there's a reason that these people are called pick-me's. So it's like, oh yeah, no, I'm not like everybody else. I'm cool. I can make jokes about this sort of stuff.
Oh, I used to pride myself on being one of the guys.
Exactly.
Like, I used to pride myself, and I was I like,
yeah,
just fucking clueless.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't even take the time to think about it.
There's an interesting video I'll share with you about that, actually, about the whole, like, in a culture where, like, the things that are deemed to be feminine are devalued. It's almost like all women go through this phase of like, well, I'm not like all women then, because I have a brain and I can think for myself and I am strong and I am all these things that, so we're kind of veering a little off topic here. But it's just suffice to say the reason we brought this up is because that this is one of those examples where at one point or another, at least one of us would have been like, oh yeah, that's fine. And in actual fact, in terms of people who have both the lived experience of what it is to be to face the consequences of that stuff, and also have done their own work and are experts and educators when it comes to that kind of privilege, that's like, when you listen to those voices, those are the people who will be going, no, hard no, that's not okay, because it's contributing to like what that's gonna lead that little boy and the boys and girls around him to think and believe about themselves and about others and what they can and can't do and what is and what isn't okay. Like, there's so much around that. So this is the reason that, like, just because one person says it's okay doesn't necessarily mean it is okay.
I mean, because it does affect them on a needs level.
Yes.
Like, and it affects you on a needs level as well.
And we'll get into that, like, in this specific, like, using the example that we're talking about today a little bit further down. So, the thing about it is that when we are engaging with a culture that is not our own, and we are gaining some benefit from utilizing that culture. Because basically in that situation, we're utilizing that culture or an aspect of that culture as a tool for meeting our own needs. Even if that's like, oh, I'm just using it for my enjoyment. I'm using it so I can feel good about myself because I think I look good in this, or whatever it is. It doesn't matter what it is. So whether that is I'm meeting my value need, I'm meeting my emotional experience expression need, I'm meeting my love need because I'm doing something that I'm loving doing. It doesn't matter. Basically, we're using that culture as a tool to meet our own needs. Now, what that does is it will negatively impact the needs of the people from that culture. Again, we talked about this in terms of whether there's an awareness of that, whether there's not an awareness of that, whether it's conscious or not. Because cultural appropriation is basically one of the things that we're saying, one of the ways in which this shows up, because it shows up in a bunch of different ways. We're not going to cover all of them today. We're talking more specifically about costuming right now. We're basically saying in that we have a right to use that culture for our benefit, whether that's for entertainment, whether it's for enjoyment, whether it's to meet other needs. And by doing that, what we're actually doing is we're devaluing that culture and saying it's something I'm entitled to use for my benefit. It exists for my benefit, when in actual fact, it's actually not for us at all. And it's like, and I'm kind of like, I'm laughing, like it's like anxious laughter, just because as I'm saying this, I'm realizing how I've engaged with this in the past. And that's really uncomfortable just to like name and own. And what that does is that then negatively impacts their value need. And this is especially amplified in the context where, if you think about, like, many people from that culture would be discriminated against the very thing that white people are wanting to use for their benefit. So, for example, like thinking about like people using wearing protective braid hairstyles. That's a version of cultural appropriation, and people might use that in the context of using a costume, but it could just be something they're using in their day-to-day life. Like, people get discriminated against for wearing hairstyles that protect their natural hair. Thinking about people wearing their cultural clothing, people face discrimination for that when the people from that culture do that. And so that further amplifies this devaluing of like, okay, hold on a second. So I get discriminated against when I do it, but it's okay for somebody else to do it as a form of entertainment or as a form of just using it for their benefit. Okay, yeah, I can see that you're wanting to jump in.
Yeah, so you're basically what we're saying. These approaches, there's not a self-first. They're not a self-first way of meeting needs. Like, you can't do this from a self-first perspective because it automatically compromises somebody else.
Yeah, so let's go back and briefly just review, what do we mean by self-first way of meeting needs? So a self-first way of meeting needs is a way of meeting needs which is meeting our needs, which at the very minimum does not negatively impact somebody else, their needs, or the needs ecosystem, and in some ways may benefit other people, their needs, or the needs ecosystem. And so if we are doing things, if we are meeting our needs in ways that harm other people because we are devaluing them, or like if we're harming people, like if we're negatively impacting somebody else in any way, in the way that we are choosing to do things. And this is like very different between, like, if you go back and listen to the episode, there's a difference between doing harm and just meeting needs that were never your responsibility in the first place. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about actions that are going to negatively impact somebody else. Now, the interesting thing is, like, I can see people being like, well, I'm not doing it to meet my needs. Well, if it doesn't meet your needs, then there should be no issue in finding another path in terms of, like, for example, like what we're talking about today, costuming. There's loads of options. And it shouldn't be an issue to then find another costume, because if it's not meeting your needs, then it doesn't matter to find a different way of doing it, because it shouldn't really impact you that much, right? Well,
shit, that makes sense.
Yeah. The thing about it is that the reason we have some attachment to it, or we have some strong desire, is because it is subconsciously probably meeting our needs in some way. And if it is meeting our needs in some way, and we are negatively impacting the needs of others in how we are engaging with getting our needs met, it is not a self-first way of meeting needs, which means that we need to try and change it up. Otherwise, because of the interconnectedness, as I said before, whether we are aware of it or not, whether we know it is happening, whether we feel it, see it, notice it, are consciously aware that it is happening, when we negatively impact other people's needs, we also negatively impact our own. So not only does this approach cost them, like the people who are getting negatively impacted and their needs, it actually costs our needs in the process as well. There are plenty of other costume options that are not appropriated, that are not harmful. Like there are so many options out there. Like our issue most years are like, how do we narrow down all the different potential ideas that we have? Because there are so many different ways of doing it. It's like this year we're dressing up as zombie corns, which is like a zombie meets a unicorn. Like there's no appropriation in that. Like that's something that is neutral. There are lots of neutral options out there that will not negatively impact somebody else. And I'm going to be honest, like, and it's interesting, like Serena's kind of over the years that we have known each other shifted dramatically in her approach to costuming, largely because of the conversations that we've had and through doing this work together. But our personal approach now is that because of the learning that we've done around this, if there is any risk that someone else could be negatively impacted from the choices that we are making, we find another option.
Any risk.
Any risk. Because why wouldn't you?
Like, even if we're like if there's never anything been said
any
ever,
hesitation.
But it's like,
could that be a problem? Yeah.
If we think it's a problem, somebody...
If we think it could be.
Somebody else probably does think it's a problem. And right there, okay. We create so many options.
It doesn't cost us anything other than this attachment to something that was harmful. Like when you frame it like that, it's like, well, why wouldn't you change it? It's to change it actually is going to make it better for everyone involved.
Right.
Like it's more enjoyable for us. And as I said, we're not aware of it, but this impacts our needs to do this. So we are going to end up feeling in some way not quite right. Something's going to feel off because... I mean, we've talked about this in previous episodes. A lot of the time, what we're talking about is this interconnectedness is our humanity. And when we devalue somebody else in any way, shape or form, we disconnect from their humanity. When we disconnect from their humanity, we automatically disconnect from our own. We cannot be connected to our humanity while disconnecting from the humanity of others. And when we disconnect from our humanity, it compromises our value need in ways that we never know. We don't see, we don't feel, we don't experience. But I'm speaking as somebody who has begun doing this work, and it is begun doing this work. This is a lifelong journey. I cannot tell you how profound it is to start to feel those pieces of humanity coming back to you again through engaging with this work and making choices that don't negatively impact other people. Like we don't know what is compromised. We don't realize how much we're compromised by this until we start doing the work to shift things in another direction. And I mean, personally, I would do this work 100 times over. Like, I mean, there is like, had such a profoundly positive effect on my life and on my relationships that I don't even know where to begin. And the key thing is, it doesn't matter what your intention is. Like a lot of people in this position were like, oh, but I don't mean to do harm. Like that's not my intention. Doesn't matter. I mean, yes, if you are intentionally trying to be harmful to another person, that is obviously worse than the degree to which they're going to be impacted and the degree to which your needs are going to be compromised. Because if you're intentionally harming others, you are massively disconnected from your humanity. So it's massively affecting you. Of course, that is going to be a little bit more extreme, or a lot more extreme depending on the circumstances. But the reality is the impact of the other person doesn't really change a huge amount because you didn't mean to do it. They're still going to feel the impact of that. And if they're feeling the impact of that, you're going to feel the impact of that. And I think the thing that's really important to say at this point, like it could be very easy to be like, oh, listen to them telling us like how this works and like this is the way to do it and blah, blah, blah. We're not telling you how to do it because we don't know. Like we're not the experts in this. And this is not coming from a place of superiority. We know better. Like we do it right and like everybody else is doing it wrong kind of thing. We have both done harm in this way in our past because we weren't aware of the negative impact to others. And I am so, so grateful to the people who I learned this from, so I could learn how to navigate this, something that we do all the time, in a way that doesn't cause negative impact to others. And I'm really grateful to those people who shared this with me and who helped me to start to see it. And as I said, because there's a needs relevant context to this, we felt it was important to just address this and name it, and then say, but don't learn about this from us. Go and learn about this from other people who are experts, who have the lived experience, who can speak to the effect it has on them personally, because it's their lived experience.
Yeah, we can only speak to our experience having done the harm and then trying to do the work to not impact people's needs in this way. Like, because it's easy.
Absolutely.
It just take a beat.
Right.
Feel into it. And that's what I do, because I used to get all spun up about costumes. I mean, I still get spun up about costumes, but I used to get all spun up about costumes, and I'd start planning them, and I'd start making them, and then I'd start ordering stuff, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh fuck. And then even at that point, all the work in, it's like, nope.
It is not worth it.
Nope.
It is not worth that is a small cost to me, because I didn't do my research beforehand to figure out how to not do harm in the first place. Like, that's the consequence is ours, because we haven't done our work beforehand.
Abso-fucking-lutely. And we're going to get into a story later about where this really played in, and the thought of impacting anybody made the entire costume feel. I was like, I couldn't even imagine being it now. Like, 9,000 people may love it, but if it negatively impacts one person, not fucking worth it.
Yeah, period. So, like, when it comes to Halloween costumes, there's a lot of like, oh, but what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And what about this? Now, again, don't listen to us about this. Like, we're not here to educate you on this. We're just like wanting to create some kind of needs context to these scenarios. So, for example, people talk about like the Disney princesses or other superheroes or fictional characters. Well, they're fictional characters. Why does it matter, kind of thing? The thing is that the inclusion of these characters are in part so that kids of those cultures can see themselves in and dress up as these characters and heroes. It was done in part to support the needs of people from that culture, because they weren't feeling as valued. They weren't feeling represented. They weren't included. They weren't valued. Like, I mean, it's not that that's something they were feeling. Obviously, they were feeling that as a result of that. But this is what society was saying, that they are less valuable, that it's not important to have them represented. And that will have an impact on their, even down to their foundation function needs, their value needs, their acknowledgement needs, their emotional experience and expression needs. Like, there's the love need. I mean, there's so many needs that are wrapped up in that. So the inclusion of these things is about, I don't think that the executives sat there and went, well, we need to do something to meet the needs of these people better. But at a cultural level, the reason this happened was because we wanted representation. We wanted people to feel valued and seen, and like they are important, because they are. And by doing that, that is supporting of their needs. So our suggestion and how we approach it, and again, this is just how we approach it. There are other people to go out there and listen to about this, is that we only use costumes from our own lineages. And actually, like, a lot of people are like, oh, but they're kids. And it's like, well, actually, this is a really good like route in to start to have these conversations with your kids, because speaking to my fellow like unmelanated people out there, like, the people like BBIMP individuals, like black, brown, indigenous, and melanated people of any age, they don't get to not have conversations about systemic racism. They don't get to not have, because they experience it in childhood still. Like, I have a good black friend of mine who's told me about experiences she had as a very, very young child. They don't get to not have these conversations. And it's really important that we have these conversations with our children, so that our children can start to be, we can start to move the pendulum in the other direction, so that these situations are not happening. And this is a really good way to start to have those conversations. And in addition, like you raised a really good point, as in, like, there's another way to approach these costume conversations, especially with children, that can actually support some of their needs, right?
Yeah, and especially the one that came to me was the personal power need.
Yeah.
By giving a child options, being like, this won't work.
Right.
This is why.
Yes.
A little bit of education. But what about this? Like giving options, asking.
Letting them make choices.
Letting them make choices, putting them into creator and having them come up with options. Well, let's come up with 5 other things. Like let's just come up with 5 other things. We don't have to commit to anything, but like in having, like starting to teach them about
and
their
options
needs.
that don't negatively impact anyone.
Yeah.
That's the important part of this. And I know what it's like. I mean, I have a young child in my life who you give them options, they always want to come up with their own option. like again, personal power is strong in this one, and I love it. And so it's like in that situation, this is where you can have dialogue and conversation to help them understand why are these costumes not something that we want to be using. Why are these options things that we do want to be using? Help them to come up with an option that fits within that realm where it's like these are things that are not going to cause any kind of a negative impact to somebody else. And I think this kind of segues kind of nicely into the example that we were talking about earlier, with a costume that you were wanting to create a couple of years ago.
Oh yeah.
And it was a Disney princess, and the costume idea, as in like how it was going to be executed, surface level execution of a specific costume sounded really cool, quote unquote. And Serena said, this is what Joe and I are going to dress up as this year. And
there it goes.
My face, I think, did all the talking for me. Right?
Yeah, I think it was facial expressions and sounds at that point. I was like, and she didn't really even have to say anything at first. And I was like, I had an air of, okay, I know where she's going with this. And it was earlier on in my work where I fought it a little bit. Like I got it, but I still fought it because I was like, oh, I know where you're going with this.
So you want to share what the costume was?
Yes. My husband rides around on an electric skateboard. So I was like, skateboard could be a flying carpet. Okay, he can be Aladdin. I can be Jasmine. And then we'll fly around on his skateboard down to Val. And I was like, this is going to be amazing. And I can wear, a Princess Jasmine costume.
And right there, I want to stop you because even like, just listen to this. Listen to what's being said right now. Now, if I now say, just think about it. This thing where I'm harming other people is going to be amazing. This thing where I'm harming other people is going to be like, it's going to be so cool. This thing where I'm harming other people, we can be flying around doing this thing that harms other people. When I put it in that context, and I feel how uncomfortable it is. Like, I feel how uncomfortable but that's what it is. And I'd had the conversation, and it was interesting. Like, I actually found an article written by somebody who was from that culture saying why this wasn't okay. And if you think about it, you just think about, where is it said? Where are the characters from? What's the skin tone of the characters?
Yeah, what do they look like?
What do they look like? And yes, they are fictional characters. But what we're doing is we're taking still that culture and using that culture as a costume in that situation. And the second I said, and it was interesting because, as Serena said, it was much earlier on in her journey. And there was some
privilege, fragility.
I was going to say pushback. It was like, well, what if I did it? Like, she was looking for ways that she could do it. And I was like, you're doing harm. Why are you looking for ways that you can do harm? Why are you looking for ways of making it so that you can benefit because you want to do this? And this is not, I mean, like, we've had this conversation at length. And Serena, this was the conversation I had with her. And I said, look, you are looking for a way to make doing harm to other people okay.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't one.
Yep. And then right after that, like, well, probably not. There was processing because then
Yeah.
the layers of my own shit was coming up because I'm like, oh, well, this should have been obvious, and it wasn't to me, and
Right.
you know, like all of these things were going through my head, and now every time I think about having potentially done that, I'm like, ugh. And as much as I loved the idea, the execution of it, the thought of it was like, even if I had done it, because I can't even say even if I had wanted to do it, even if I had done it, I wouldn't have felt good in it, knowing that it could be potentially that it would be harming people.
Right. Yeah. Whether you're aware of
it or not.
And this is a great example in a lot of ways, because like, where did this come from? It came from the fact that Joe drives an electric skateboard. And what could that skateboard become? He could be Marty McFly out of Back to the Future 2 and on his hoverboard.
He's going to be a shooting star instead.
Oh, he's going to be a shooting star. So he could be like a character from the Jetsons, like from something in the future. Like there are so many ways that the thing that was the cool element of this could be done in such a way that wasn't going to negatively impact somebody else.
And could be cooler.
Right.
Like,
yeah. Like
it just...
And it is infinitely, it is. The very fact that you're not doing harm automatically...
That's cool.
Makes it... Like, I don't like using the word cool in that context. It makes it decent.
Yeah.
It's not cool. It's not fun. It's not amazing. It is just being a decent human being.
Yeah.
That is all it is. And it's like, I liked the idea of how do we make this thing that he uses into something that's part of a costume. That's what I thought was cool. But to not do harm is just human decency. And it is the reason that it is such an integral part of us getting our own needs met. If the second we are engaging, even if we're not personally doing something, if we are engaging with the system that harms others in order to get our needs met, our needs are going to be compromised as a result of that. And it's like the other thing that kind of came up as a result of this is that like it's important to also be aware, like, what is the history of this costume? Where did it come from? Like, what is that? Is there more to, because I mean, being a Brit in America, I cannot tell you how many cultural references there are from this country that I do not get. Like, people will say, oh, I can't remember, someone gave an example of like the so-and-so baby. Like, there's a baby that
Lindenberg?
I don't know.
Baby
Isn't
Jessica?
Isn't that a bad thing?
The Lindenberg baby got kidnapped.
No, yeah, no, I'm talking about like it was like a brand.
Oh, Gerber.
Yes, there we go, the Gerber baby. There we go. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that's not a good reference. The one you've just come up with.
No, Gerber baby.
Or like there were certain TV shows or music or movies that I'm not aware of, and likewise the other way around. Like I'll say something, and Serena will go, "What did you just say?" Like there are things that if we have not grown up around them, we don't know where they came from. And there are things that even though we grew up around them, we don't know where they came from. Like most people don't know. Like this is it's more of a kind of, it's not an appropriative example, I don't believe. But like, people don't realize that the nursery rhyme, Ring a Ring a Rosie, came from the Black Plague in London. Like the Ring a Ring a Rosie is like, there was like a red mark ring that used to come up as part of the disease. Pocket full of posies was like, they used to keep flowers on them, because the smell of death was everywhere, and it was a way of avoiding that.
Ashes,
a tissue.
ashes.
Well, no, in the UK, it's a tissue, or it's like bless you. The reason people say bless you when they sneeze was because sneezing was that was an indicator that you had the plague and you were probably going to die. And so in the UK, it was a tissue, because that was the symptom. We all fall down, like as in we all fall down dead. Like that's where the origins of that nursery rhyme is. I didn't know that when I was growing up. I just sung the nursery rhyme because we got taught the nursery rhyme. Like we didn't know what the origins were of that. I'm like, looking back now, I'm like, really? This was appropriate for us to be learning as children? Like,
well, it's interesting because you're saying, and we've had this conversation before too, but in the States, it's ashes, ashes. We all fall down, which I was told was the cremation of the bodies.
Right.
Like
same kind of principle.
But as a child, like I'm spinning in a circle, ring around the happy, gleeful, singing about the fucking plague.
And there are a lot of those kind of nursery rhymes and stories that are really problematic, and that we should never be. And like I like when I think about one, like from when I was a child, there's one with a word in it that you would never use now, and I didn't even know that that's what that I thought I thought was a different word. Like I'm like. Oh my God! Like that was part of like what we were like. So this is the thing. This is why we have to do our work first to unlearn these systems and to dismantle where they exist inside of us. Because that pushback that comes up is that's because we're attached to our privilege, and we're still in that system, like that we're engaging with that system that lives inside of us, because it's the system of privilege and discrimination and oppression that we've been living and breathing our entire lives. So we want to, like, it's really important for us to unlearn that. It's important for us to proactively learn about this stuff, so we don't accidentally teach our nephew or niece or nibbling a nursery rhyme that is problematic, that we don't even realize is problematic because we don't know where it comes from ourselves. Like go back to it. But also with costumes, and it was this is one that Serena brought up, which is that some costumes, people don't know what the history is of them. There are some that we know, like people using indigenous cultural clothing and artifacts as a costume. Like a lot of us know where that comes from. A lot of us know with certain other, like, okay, this is a costume because this is from the way that people in this country dress or what have you. But there are some that people don't know. And you want to share the one that you kind of raised as a flag that people sometimes just don't know about.
Yeah. We've talked in the past in the C word episode. We also have the G word slur. I'm going to say it once just so people who haven't listened to the episode know what we're talking about, and then I'm going to refer to it as the G word, and that is gypsy. So people, it's a costume that Claire wasn't aware of, like, but I've been it. Like, I have actually been it, and it wasn't a fortune teller. It was the G word, because I had no clue. I thought I had the G word soul and all of that kind of
very white woman thing to do. Like I'm a free spirit.
Yes.
Well, and in which case now I then have I'm appropriating that culture. There's a difference between saying I'm an adventurer. I'm someone who enjoys to travel. I'm like, and again, there's a layer of that, like the feeling we got the right to go and
go to different places,
use other people's cultures as our benefit in that respect, but like that's a separate podcast episode. But like the fact saying that I'm an adventurer, very different to saying I have a G word spirit, because that is appropriating that culture, and that has a meaning to it. It is not just a descriptor that means traveler,
right? And people forget that the Romani people are a culture.
Right. Yes,
like that is their culture. In that it's. Different cultures are so weaved into our society, and it doesn't take long. You're like, oh wait, this seems like the costume itself seems cultural. Like if you look at it, there seems to be a cultural aspect to it. Like Google it.
Right. And the thing about it is, like, I just got to say at this point, like, this is a really good opportunity for people who look like we do to go back and trace your lineage. And find out what is your cultural lineage. What are the clothings and the practices and the rituals that associate with your roots, not with somebody else's that you're utilizing. Like some people would say, "Oh, I'm just borrowing it." No, you're stealing it basically, and you're utilizing it for your benefit.
It's not your culture. Please correct me if I'm wrong with this. You're not honoring it either. I've heard
it's. This is where, like, and I said, I'm going to shut down that piece of the conversation, because there may be ways of engaging with other cultures that may be honoring. There are maybe ways of engaging with other cultures that are appreciating, not appropriating. That is not for us to say. We don't have the right to speak on that. Again, go and listen and go and find out from those cultures, how do you do that in a way that is like, I'm very mindful, like, let's like not kind of expand this piece of the conversation, because we don't have the right, we don't have the knowledge, we don't have the lived experience to be able to speak on that. And I don't have enough, I've been doing this for years, and I'm only just starting on my work in this area, which is the reason that I'm like, there are certain topics where I'm like, nope, that's not for us to discuss. There are, like, if you want to learn whether that is an option, whether it is not, I mean, there may be people who are like, no, there's never a way of doing that. I don't know. Go and learn from the people who are experts and educators when it comes to this. And I think that, like, just another, do you want to say anything more about the Roman example? Like, just, I think the other thing is that I've seen this often also with like cultural gods or goddesses, like, or it's like, oh, like people using that as a costume. That has a meaning. It is not something for, I'm going to be really honest, some white people to come along and use as entertainment, which is what we're doing in that situation. And by doing that, we're diluting it, we're devaluing it, and there are so many layers to it. This is so complex and so nuanced. We are just talking about it at a very simplistic level right now, just because we have a responsibility where we teach about needs to help you to be aware of where you are doing things that are negatively impacting other people's needs and negatively impacting your own, which is the reason we're having this conversation right now. The other thing that is, it's really important for me to kind of include in this is that adornments and other aspects are still not okay at any time. Like, we're not just talking about this. Is not only relevant at Halloween. It's not like, oh, from the 1st of October through the middle of November, it's not okay to do this, but the rest of the time it's fine. Because it's not okay for us to be appropriating other people's culture at any time. And this is a place where I have a responsibility to make an apology, because there was a point in my life where because I was exploring my spirituality and I was wanting to be more aware. The irony of all of this is just unbelievably horrific to me, is that I would wear a bindi, and I unequivocally apologize for the negative impact of my choices and the behaviors that were rooted in my ignorance. And it was not something I did as a costume. It was something I would do in a lot of different situations. And the most important thing for me is the people who were negatively impacted by that choice. They are what is important. And so, like, we're consistently learning, growing, and understanding how to do better, so that we can be not be harmful, so that we can not negatively impact because of our ignorance, and also start to address it and make amends. Like, that's part of the reason we're having this conversation right now, is because we want to be speaking to people like us and saying, hey, we have to address this, because this is an issue within our culture, that we are doing this and doing harm to other people. It's the reason that I had the conversations that I did with Serena. Like, a lot of people really shy away from these conversations with the people who are close to them, because they're afraid that their other needs are going to get impacted. Or it's like, oh, well, if they don't like me anymore, my love needs going to be negatively impacted. Like, subconscious conversation that's going on. This is not a conscious thing. And there are some really tough conversations that Serena and I have had over the years. And thank God that we have, because we wouldn't have the relationship we do now if we didn't. And like, these conversations need to take place. This is part of the reason we're doing this episode, is to speak to other people like us to try to reduce the harm being done and the negative impacts by other people's ignorance, because we've been ignorant and we've done harm as a result of that. And as I said, I unequivocally apologize. I'm looking to find ways to make amends and to do better, but it's not about me. It's not about me and the journey and me going, look at me, I'm doing all this stuff. It's about the people harmed, and it's about how do we better support them? How do we raise up those voices? How do we and actually I think that like I haven't I've had this conversation with Serena. This is coming out live on the podcast. But I think that like we've talked about at some point we wanted to potentially bring other people into these conversations. And I think that at some point we will bring on, like once we start to have guests and we'll figure out the technology of how to do the guest thing. Like we can barely figure out the technology for two of us at the moment, let alone for a third person. But that's something that is like imminent that we want to start doing. And we want to bring other voices in and hear their voices and where we can put the needs context in, but really listen to what they've got to say so that you can be learning directly from them. Not from us, because you shouldn't be learning about this from us. Like this is us saying, hey, we are unmelanated people and we need to be having these conversations in our communities so that we can start to address this. But also, here are the people to go and listen to. Like that, I've learned from other people about this, and I've heard people sharing about how their cultures have been appropriated in costume or in fashion, or like I use that inverted commas,
in theme.
So there's so many ways in which this shows up, and so I really want to say, like, before we kind of call a close to this conversation, do not let this episode be the end of your learning about this, because really, like we've done is just said from a needs context, this is an issue. You're going to be negatively impacting other people's needs, and you're going to be negatively impacting your own needs by doing this. But we are not the people to learn about this from. Let this be the beginning. Let this be the thing where, like, I remember the person, and they are very close and very dear to me, who helped me like start to wake up to the ignorance that I had and the things I wasn't aware of. And I'm so infinitely grateful, because that sparked my journey to go, okay, I need to go and learn this. I need to go and pay educators. I need to go and figure out how to dismantle this and figure out how to do better. This is my invitation to you, and our invitation to you as part of this episode. Seek out and pay experts and educators on these topics who are from the cultures that you want or wanted to engage in these ways, so you can hear from them directly, like how this harms, like what that actually means. But you have to pay them for that. Like that's that they don't have. We don't have the right to education for free. That's another way in which our privilege and our entitlement and our sense of superiority shows up. All of these systems negatively impact all. The system of white supremacy, the system of patriarchy, the system of capitalism, the system of systemic racism, the system of ableism, of transphobia, of homophobia, of like fatphobia. All of these systems negatively impact us all. And we have a tendency when these things come up to kind of like initially retreat back into them and like hold on to them. And that's doing us harm to do that. That's negatively impacting our needs to do that, which is again why we're having this conversation right now, because we want you to know that this is something that negatively impacts you too. And it's not necessarily an easy journey to start exploring this, but it is really essential to getting our needs effectively met. Anything you want to add before we kind of wrap up today?
No, that was a heavy one.
It was, yeah, like, it was.
Like even processing it, like we've obviously had these conversations before, but it's still like anytime we talk about it, I'm like, okay, like almost doing the mental checks and balances, like, and be like for myself, like be mindful, like remember to be mindful.
Right. And it's heavy because we realize the impacts that we're having, and we have to go and process that. Like we have to process through it. We can't avoid that, because if we avoid it, we're not actually doing the work. But also, we want to do this away from those people impacted so that we're not adding more to them to have to be and deal with us going through our shit.
You've been carrying this bullshit around. Here's mine to help me through it.
Yeah, like, no. Absolutely not. Like, and this is the reason that we have these conversations between two of us. And we like, this is not something where it's like, oh, I did this once, this thing once a while ago.
This is a continual conversation. And it's a continual conversation between us too, even though, you know, in some senses, like it's a little more ingrained to us to be like, not okay. But there's still some blurred lines sometimes where it's like, you get that like, you know, I'm going to look into this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've heard us on the podcast where we're like, I mean, and there are times where you'll see us. We are continually trying to dismantle like ableist language. You've heard us do that live on the podcast if you've listened to all the episodes. And this is like, we are constantly, I'm looking at learning from different educators in these areas. We both are, in order to make sure that we are continuing to do our work. But again, it's not about us. We have to make sure that we are operating in a way which is centering the needs of the people who are harmed in these situations. And that has to be how we approach these situations. If we do not, then we negatively impact them, their needs, and we negatively impact our own. So it's really important for the well-being of everybody involved that this is how we start to approach it. Okay, is that it?
That's it.
Okay, thank you for being with us. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Please, please, please go and learn more about this, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's on TikTok, whether it's through doing courses. There are courses available where you can start learning about this and doing this work of dismantling. It's so important to do it in community and not to try and do it on our own, because if we do it on our own, we're in our own echo chamber. We need these people like helping us and like reflecting these things to us. But we need to pay people to do that. We need to be paying the people who have the lived experience that get impacted by it. So please go and do that work and just start that journey. So it's a lifelong journey. It will be for us. It will be for anybody who engages with this work. And it is so worth it, not just to not do harm for others, which is so important, but also because it means that our needs are not being negatively impacted along the way as well. So thank you for being here. Thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for listening. Remember, between now and next time, to take care of yourself, to stay safe, to continue to meet your own needs. Lots of love. Bye.
Bye, friends.
That's it for today.
If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and give us a written review,
as it will help more people find us. And remember, culture is not a costume at Halloween or any time.
Well, shit. It really is that simple.